AJ, how you doing, my friend?
I'm great, Al. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic now that I'm going to be talking with you about workforce planning and building fluid organizations to benefit not only customers and shareholders, but employees themselves. So if you would, please introduce yourself and let's get into it.
Sure. Hi, everyone. AJ Herrmann. I've run strategic workforce planning and people analytics programs at the Cleveland Clinic, Nestle USA as a consultant with Boston Consulting Group. Spent a long time in the government doing intelligence analysis for the CIA. I'm from Buffalo, New York, and my passion these days is inventing the future of work, just like Al's. Right? It's the right time to do it. It's the type of work where 5 years ago it would have been a slog. It was a slog, but the technology, the market, the appetite is there for us to take assertive action right now. So that's what I love talking about.
Well, I was reading your abstract and I was getting fired up because you're talking about a systematic approach and there's going to be a host of benefits which you're going to talk about. So let me get out of the way. You go for about 10 minutes or so, and then we'll have a little chat and we'll get additional clarity into how we can, as leaders, prepare for the future of work. Sound good?
That sounds great. Yeah. Um, a lot of this idea or theory has come about from leading strategic workforce planning in healthcare for several years, and seeing the challenges that healthcare has gone through since the pandemic and is going to go through in the future. And I don't think it's specific to healthcare in terms of talent scarcity, the rise of technology, which should be a huge boon to our workforce, but we're not seeing the adoption that we need. And more so, as I read through the literature, read the news, read the LinkedIn posts, what I see are workforce transformations coming all the time, constant, right? A constant flow across industries of huge transformations that are arduous, right? It's almost a perfect storm of needing to upend the traditional human capital levers, as I like to call them, because a lot of them aren't working as well as they used to in terms of recruiting, compensation, benefits, retention, employee engagement. We keep pulling the same levers harder or faster and hoping for different results. But some of the bigger efforts that we're looking at, the large scale efforts to address the troubling talent market, socioeconomic issues, regulatory and government issues, things like upskilling, like gig work, bringing generative AI, they're still being done in silos across HR. That function is doing it, or that SME center of excellence within HR is doing that transition, and they are time consuming. They're expensive. We all know this, right? They're arduous for our employees and for our staff, and they're not guaranteed to have a return on investment. But what I see the difference now is that I don't think these transformations are ever going to stop, at least in our career spans, right? The pace of change will just require constant transition. But I think there's a way that we don't have to keep doing this, that we don't have to say, all right, we've just done this huge retitling project. Now we need to redo this upskilling project. Now we need to do this project, switch our HRIS system over and over again. Instead of pursuing individual transformations, the theory, right, that I think we can pursue is a concept that I like to call workforce fluidity. It's a foundational perspective that since our roles, our skills, and our technology in the workplace are always going to be in motion, our human resource strategy must embrace constant change. And I want to disaggregate this from workforce agility, or workforce resilience, which I think is positive reaction to an outside force, right? If you're knocked off balance, agility gets you back to normal. That's sort of a reactive thing. You can build agility through programs, through technology, through training. But workforce fluidity is about putting it into practice every day, about living change, about being a workforce that is used to change, that is practicing it. It's almost like if you want to become a Major League Baseball player, you can't just watch baseball, right? You need at bats. You need to actually have that muscle memory, that habit. I'll tell a story from my time in the CIA, which I think is one of the places that lives workforce fluidity better than any. I was an analyst in the Directorate of Analysis, what was called Directorate of Intelligence at the time. And there was a motto that once an analyst, always an analyst. And we were trained the same way. We had our tradecraft, our skill set, our fundamental core values and skills that we practiced and were measured on. Your account, meaning what you covered, an area of the world, a functional topic, that could change. And it changed all the time. And that was something that was accepted. If it was, we need someone covering this part of the world tomorrow, and I say, but I don't do that, they would say, you have tradecraft, you have these skills, you're this type of analyst. After the attacks in 2001 on 9/11, they needed a whole bunch more counterterrorism analysts than they had. But because they had this foundational fluidity of analysts moving around, they were able to cover that very quickly and effectively, without having to do enormous hiring surges and bring on, they did hire more people, obviously, but without having to bring on a whole bunch of inexperienced new hires. Because they had this motion, they had this constant flow of talent and of folks, and people embraced it, right? It was culturally embraced. This may seem aspirational, and obviously what works in the CIA is not going to work everywhere. But as I break it down in my head, I think today, 2025, there are 3 steps that we can pursue as human capital strategists, as workforce planners, as CHROs, as just, future of work thinkers. We can break this down and we can actually aspire to this, come closer to it in our own organization. So I'll lay those out, and they're relatively simple. I think the first one is a mindset shift. I think human resources needs to have an opinion on AI. I think we need to have more than an opinion. I think we need to take a leadership role within bringing automation and driving adoption of generative AI automation in our workforces. We've seen the numbers. I've seen, low 20% in terms of automation or AI adoption in workforces. I've seen folks on LinkedIn just the other day say, I have 100% adoption, but it's not driving business outcomes because people are essentially dabbling with the AI tools, not introducing them into their everyday work. But the difference is that this generation of automation, generative AI, large language models, are predominantly a workforce. They're addressing workforce challenges. They span the entire workforce. It's not a specific tech like, a warehouse moving robotics or something like that. It's something that can be applied very broadly across a workforce, predominantly administrative tasks too, right? And the tech is so easy to use. It's intuitive. The roadblock, I think, to getting this adoption going and getting those benefits is actually finding the right tasks to address with this automation, and then redesigning the job accordingly, right? We're sort of saying, here's the tech, over to you. Have fun, explore it. I don't think it's a training issue. If we trained everybody on every AI tool, the material would be obsolete way too quickly, right? And we'd have to redo it. So identifying the return on investment on what are the tasks that our folks are struggling with, that are error prone, that are mundane, that burn them out, right? That's how we drive employee engagement while bringing more generative AI into the workforce. We want to bring the human back into the job, not reduce the humans in the jobs. I think that this is the natural evolution of human resources going forward, right? Like, this is what everyone's like, there's a good conversation, sort of what's the next generation of HR? What's HR 2.0, whatever it is. I think that this is HR with a much stronger leadership role in technology, right? In specifically automation, because our IT departments are maxed, right? They're very busy. Our strategy folks are looking at other things. Our chief digital officers are thinking about specifically the tech itself, maybe, right? And how it can be crafted and how it can be effective. Who are the folks who should take that perspective of how do we bring this into the workforce most effectively in the most engaging way? That's us, right? That's, I think, our next step of destiny. The second stage, or second step, I would say, is then with that knowledge to fundamentally redesign jobs at the task level. This is not something I've heard, some of this called like Tinder for talent, like, hey, here's a tech. Do you want to try it? Here's a job that's similar to yours. Do you want to try it? I think a more assertive, strategic perspective is needed, where we say, all right, we've found these technologies that can make your job better, we're going to change the job. We're going to combine jobs. We're going to disaggregate jobs that that work next to each other, but really should have their own specialties. At Cleveland Clinic, we've had tremendous success with this. We've redesigned 12 of our most critical jobs. And we find that when we take this hard look, we can find at least 30% efficiency in jobs that can predominantly benefit from technology, right? But it requires that hard look, and it requires us having an opinion that HR might not have always had. We might have left it to the business or the owner of that job to make those decisions. But the reality I've learned in my time doing this is that practitioners do not redesign their own jobs. It's a hard truth, but there's too much cognitive bias. There's just too much in the way intellectually for someone to have a sort of blue sky invention of what the future of their work could be. Doing this role redesign, Cleveland Clinic, we created the equivalent of 800, more than 800 FTEs, full-time equivalents, through technology, through efficiencies, and saved $12 million while doing it. So this works, but it takes that more aggressive stance and that strong perspective on technology. And the third step is bringing it all together. That's what I like to call dynamic career pathing. This is where the fluidity really, the rubber hits the road. This to me is a constant flow of talent in rotational assignments, vice permanent positions. This is a holdup, I think, in many industries. Healthcare is one of them, where because the jobs are permanent, people go there, they get comfortable, they get stuck, and they don't like the job anymore, but they're not sure where to go from there, right? I could see in the CIA model more of a constant flow of jobs that have the same skill set, the same tasks, but it's more of a flow where it's, I'm going to go over here for 2 years. And then based on how hard that job was, maybe I do something that's a little less intense, maybe something where I could be hybrid or remote. And then I rotate back into something. A constant flow is what we did within the government, so that you're not stuck, but also it's those at bats. It's the practice of movement, the practice of flow. It's dynamic. I believe that a lot of the newest generation of people entering the workforce, they want this change. They want these new experiences. They want the diversity of experience and diversity of challenge. But it also has tremendous benefits for the organization, right? This will be the biggest test, I think, for our human resources infrastructure, because we're not built on this, right? In terms of compensation, in terms of performance management. One of the biggest reasons that this worked within the government is because the first level people leaders were very, very strong and were very passionate about this culture of flowing in and out of jobs and being very fluid and dynamic. So I don't think that these three things are these are aspirational, to be sure, right? I think the only place that this would exist, a fully fluid workforce would exist, would be within a military unit or a sports team, right? If you think about it, they can flow within positions, rotate in, rotate out, and they're very good at it because they do it all the time. But the organizations that take this as an aspiration, that say to myself, if the future of my human resources function is I'm going to have a strong perspective on technology and automation, I'm going to be one of the leaders that pushes adoption of technology for the right tasks and increase the employee value proposition while I do it. 1. 2, I'm going to redesign jobs. I'm going to make new roles. I'm going to say, hey, should an inpatient nurse resemble an inpatient nurse from 20 years ago? Should I be looking at that? Should we be taking these perspectives and this information and redesigning jobs from the ground up? I can tell you from my experience, the answer is yes. And it's not as hard as you think. It's really more about a mindset and about stakeholder management, right? Proving that redesigning jobs benefits everybody. Letting it happen organically will just sort of add stuff onto the job that nobody really wants or expects. And the third is building that flow of rotational experiences in and out of stressful jobs, so that you're not just talking agility on PowerPoint or in training, but you're practicing fluidity, right? I think that's the big difference. The organizations that can do this or get close to this, I believe will have a competitive advantage that's difficult to replicate, at least quickly, if at all. They will reduce labor costs, adopt technology more quickly, upskill their workforces, and employee engagement, I believe, will go up. But they will also be able to endure business socioeconomic shocks better than companies for whom agility is a buzzword or something that is discussed but never practiced. So, Al, in general, that's what I think we should be pursuing. Easier said than done, but to me, that's the ambition that the opportunity that HR has in front of it.
Yeah, I so appreciate how you think and how you express these ideas in such a clear and inspiring manner, because I I believe the same to be true. And this being that we're living in a world of increasing change, and we've been saying this for 20, 30 years, and it's not going to change. We're going to have ongoing continuous disruptions, and we have to have new governance models and ways of doing things at executive levels and even down to the team level that appreciates this dynamic nature of life. So AI, in other words, is disrupting the very nature of work, and our individual employees going to be open to that? And more systematically, are we going to embrace that and allow the movement that you're talking about and this ongoing learning? So I got a few questions, and I want to start actually with a post from Kathleen Hogan, from Microsoft, the chief people officer of Microsoft, just was yesterday, the day before. And I thought, based on the nature of how the post started, is that, okay, she's retiring, she's handing it off to somebody else. It actually was an announcement that she is going to be leading strategy and transformation at Microsoft.
Hmm.
And I got a chill.
Mhm.
I was like,
Yeah.
that is absolutely wonderful. So you talk about the next generation of where we're going in HR. It is, to your point, it's not just digital transformation and IT and the CTO, CIO over here, and we in HR and workforce planning just dealing with the decisions that were made, totally absent of how it's going to affect the human experience and workforce size, workforce skills, and all that stuff. So here's my question.
Mhm.
What do you think about the governance model moving forward? I mentioned the CIO, CTO, COO, CFO, CHRO. Right now, as you have shared in the abstract, this is very siloed thinking, that's legacy thinking. There's a lot of inertia there. But
Mhm.
if you were going to wave a wand, what would be, and I know it depends on industry and a variety of other variables, but what would you like to see as an ongoing governance model around how to enable workforce fluidity or even company fluidity?
Sure. Yeah, this is our moment, isn't it? Right? Like
Mhm.
this is human capital, human resource, human, workforce strategies moment. It's our Super Bowl. All
Mhm.
these things coming together at once, from the pandemic to the reduction of our labor force. I could go on, right? The baby boomer retirement cliff we're going to fall off. Technology, obviously, all those things are. It's like all those factors I envision sitting in a room and staring at HR saying, "Do something." Right? It shouldn't be reactive. I I was having a conversation on LinkedIn the other day about just listen to our passive language when we talk about what AI is going to do, what we need to be ready for. It's all passive. It's all what's going to happen to us. Um,
Mhm.
all the things that I just mentioned to me are tools that I can use to drive a fluid, effective, resilient, happy, uh, self-actualized workforce. Work needs to get better for humans, right?
Yep.
Work is going to be much different, but it can be much better. I think that's the sunlight in this. We haven't had something before where, at least in my lifetime, where technology was making work a more pleasant experience, right? At least administrative work, like white collar work. Um, I think in terms of the governance model, I love that Microsoft is taking that perspective, because everyone says, "Oh, our greatest asset is our workforce." No one meant it until the pandemic,
Mhm.
right? And then
Yep.
they're like, "Oof, uh, actually, when I don't, that is it can be a real threat to your ability to work if you don't have the right workforce." We're having a skills crisis. We're having an availability crisis. We're having economic conditions right now that are causing a lot of layoffs. So we're at this inflection point where I think human resources needs to see itself less as a compliance organization and a reactive employee services organization, because that is a lot of the stuff that AI can do. A lot, right? If you take some of our biggest roles, HR business partners, compensation folks, they can take a lot of the scut work out. But how do they reinvest that time? What do they invest it into? I think a chief workforce strategy officer is an interesting idea. I've never said that out loud. I've never seen it before, but I think that's what some organizations should be getting at. The strategy offices that I've worked with are focused on mergers and acquisitions or business growth, organic and otherwise. Maybe that gets separated into more of an external strategy and internal strategy. And internal strategy should be workforce focused predominantly. But I think just one more thing, I think it's a mindset shift within HR of we're a voice at the table, and the business, I don't want to say the business is not always right, but the business is not going to change itself.
Right. Right. No, I really appreciate where you're coming from on this and what you're putting forth. And so two things come to mind, actually a lot more, but I'm going to pick on two things. I want to talk about the future of the HR business partner in a minute. But before we go there, I am exploring this notion of how organizations formulate, measure, and manage work strategy. In other words, how does work get done and by who? Is it going to be done by a human being? And if so, is that going to be a long-term employee, which is a long-term investment? Or is it going to be done by a contractor, outsource provider? Or is it going to be done by an AI agent or robotic automation or any number of ways work can get done? What's your reaction to that? How does that sit with you?
The thing that I'm most proud of that we've done at Cleveland Clinic is devise task analysis and redesign jobs using getting down to the studs of what does the job do. The past several years, human capital has been very focused on skills-based talent management, and there's a lot of benefit to it. However, I think if we're going to get close to what you're describing of a way to say, what does my organization actually do? I believe it's tasks, right? And tasks, I think, are something that we don't pursue sometimes because we think it's a gargantuan undertaking. We think it's too granular, but it's not. We've found that any job, any role has on average about 60 tasks, 60 different things that it does, right? And we can measure those in terms of time. We can even measure those in terms of money. How much does it cost for you to put an object from point A to point B? Once you start doing that, the unlock of understanding what your workforce is really doing is pretty stark. It's like a superpower, but it's more bottom up thinking than I think HR is used to doing, or any organization. What do? We do top down. Let's take all of our workday information. Let's download our entire HRS. Let's map it to a skills library. You can do a lot of cool stuff with that, but it won't tell you what to do. It won't invent something new. When you do the sort of entrepreneurial style that we do, it's gonna get you to action faster, right? And we're finding as you do this with more and more jobs, you do that task analysis, you reinvent the jobs, you realize there's so much overlap in what people are doing, so much task overlap, which yes makes skill overlap a lot easier to find, right? And a lot more like it's better data. I guess you could say it's not as subjective. What we're doing is allowing us to really see our workforce in a way that top-down analytics doesn't usually do. But really what it allows us to do is then say, because of that, we should do X, Y, Z. I've been an analyst or worked in analytics since I was out of college. And what's been drilled into me is the answer is never a number. The answer is an action. But I think with a lot of the great data and the easy analysis that we can do these days, we're happy with the answer being a number. And I think if we can get to the task level and we can start, translating that into distinct actions, then I think organizations can say that task, I don't need to hire somebody. I can push that to a different role. I can automate that. I cannot do that task and nothing bad happens, right? And when I hire that person, wow, they could work remotely, right? Or that, all these things, it makes those decisions far more better informed.
I love it. I'm smiling like this because going back to my Ernst and Young days, EY days, we were talking and delivering services around activity-based costing, activity-based management, identifying value-added tasks, non-value-added tasks, all this stuff. So it's kind of coming back around. And obviously the tools in which to do this are a lot better.
Yeah.
And the insight thus is much better. And there's a fear out there, of course, that, okay, if I identify the task that I'm doing, am I doing it too long? Am I going to get in trouble? So, the self-reported task, there's some difficulty when we
Sure.
put the human in that loop. But where I want to go with this, and I love that you're thinking at this because I think it's the appropriate granularity, because with granularity, you have these heightened level of resolution distinctions, if you will, and then we can consciously allocate the work to what's going to be most efficient and effective. My question is, at what altitude do you think this can and should be done? And let me give you an example, like self-driving cars. That can be a strategic executive altitude because we know the task involved in driving a car and the inputs, to the task and the actions to your point.
Mhm.
But in other more maybe human-centric or creative disciplines, the work might have to be defined at a team level or maybe even at a individual level. Can you speak to your
Yeah.
experience and ideas on that?
I think I might be advocating splitting the difference a
Mhm.
little bit, but between those two things. This type of analysis, this driving fluidity, as I might say, having a perspective on technology, redesigning your jobs, creating fluidity and dynamic career pathing, that is done at a close-up level. That is done face to face. That is done, I think, in a high-touch consulting sort of style. Um, but over time, you will start to see the connective tissue between your jobs, between your different business units, between all those different things. That's something that the C-suite needs to be aware of and needs to be able to take action on. So it's like this starts at the low levels, right? Because it takes um, driven, intelligent people to sort of unlock some of this. But once it gets momentum, then it needs to be translated because the opportunities will start increasing by an order of magnitude,
Mm.
right? If I redesign a team and I understand that that team actually has um, analogies elsewhere, great. Then I'm going to redesign all those teams, and then those teams work in different regions. All these things, it starts to get bigger and bigger. I'd say the key is that group that is driving this needs to do this full time,
Mm.
right? Needs to have this as not a specialty, but they need to be people who drive this because don't we have a tendency, not just within HR, but within it's just a human tendency to take like the Diet Coke version of our ideas, right? Like huge idea. AJ said, we got to do dynamic career pathing, and we're gonna because of feasibility, cost, timing, personality, money, whatever it is, we're gonna do a version of that. We're gonna do something a rotational optional assignment with this one job into the other, and you lose the ROI because you lose the vision of it. You lose the these are big ideas with big impact, but the idea needs to be executed. So you need that team that will drive the execution, right? At Cleveland Clinic, I built a program that's not only the people doing the thinking and the relationship management and the analytics, but then the people who are going to be driving the change and are going to be the strategic partner with whatever unit we're working with. And that's different. That is not, we mentioned the future of HR business partners, but I think that is in part what the vision of the future of HR BPs was or is to be able to do the analytics, have the conversations with the leaders and drive the change. That's what to me is required for this is you need that team of special forces thinkers who can drive stuff like this to be in the middle between the small team and the C-suite.
So if I'm understanding correctly, there is a focused COE, if you will, that is looking at the task, analyzing the task, offering insights and ideas, and likely facilitating a process. And the HR business partners are effectively doing, for lack of a better term, doing workforce planning or building workforce agility or fluidity within the group or sphere of which they're influencing. Is that a fair playback?
It is. We couldn't do this work without great HR business partners because we don't know all the leaders. We don't know their history. We don't know how they're going to react to certain things. The HR business partners are like an advanced intelligence team, right? Like, they're doing our recce for us because they're like, here's what just happened. Here's what this business is going through. So we get that. But then also, they're a part of our team. When we do a redesign or a project, the HR business partner has no distinction from a member of the planning team. They are there throughout because they need to understand it. But then, so we can move on to another project. The HR business partner remains, keeps that relationship. And then if they need a boost, if they need something, it's just a very close relationship. I don't believe that you can separate the two. I do feel strongly that we can't expect HR business partners to do this by themselves.
Got it. Well, I'm hearing some concern within HR. It's like, oh, what's the future of the HR business partner? Well, a lot of the tasks are going to be automated and they're going to shrink the size of the HR organization. That's happening in some cases, and it might be appropriate. However, just returning from a conference, I heard an executive saying exactly what you just said. Hey, we are creating capacity within the HR org, and we're taking that capacity and actually having them do what she called strategic workforce planning. And we were looking at it like, if that's true, that's cool, because obviously that's immensely necessary. But there's also a degree of skepticism. Is that really, what's happening and what does it look like? And we didn't get to that level of detail. So it sounds like that's your hope, is that this elevated capacity within HR is going to be dedicated to.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I think so highly of HR business partners and the work that they do every day, because it's a very stressful job because you live the life of your business. Like the HR business partners that support, nursing functions, they have to sort of adopt that lifestyle, right? Like they have to deal with that. I think the biggest mistake we could make is, as technology gives us a dividend of time, that we say, awesome, we're just going to take that savings and reduce the labor force entirely, or reinvest it back into the HR business partners and expect them to do something they've never done before. Right? If you become an HR business partner, it's because you're drawn to certain tasks and certain skills. We can't just say, we can't turn a horse into a zebra, right? Overnight. We have to sort of, I'm a big fan of consciously changing jobs, consciously, transparently, visibly, together changing the job and say, look, HR business partner, your value proposition to the org is probably going to change, probably has been changing, and it'll continue to. Let's talk that through, right? So and what do you need to do that? What training, mindset, resources, but not just, hey, you've been doing employee services, now you have to do analytics. What? I see it happen way too often.
Well, hey, a couple more questions, and then you'll start to wrap. So, yeah, there's a lot of tools out there, and there's a lot of language. And so, there's people analytics, workforce planning, talent intelligence, talent marketplace, employee experience, all this stuff.
Yep.
And there's technologies associated with all those domains. Where do you see are they going to come together in a more cohesive way? Is that, again, this is very much a leading question. I'll own it.
Yeah.
But what are your thoughts on what are currently largely disparate processes, where you have workforce planning over here and people analytics, and you have employee surveys and experience over here? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a great thing to point out. And it's like any market where new companies enter the market, right? Like, how many different streaming services are there right now? And you're like, how do you all exist? I can't buy 15. We do, unfortunately, right? But like, we shouldn't have to watch TV, pay 15 different people. So like, you have to consolidate at some point. I think all these different terminologies, teams, groups at different levels is a byproduct of direct result of people realizing the things that I'm saying, which is now is a time that we're in an inflection point for human resources. So they're taking steps. The steps they're calling them different things, and that's okay. I've heard it called, I talk with people like you all the time. I've heard it called everything under the sun. There's no right or wrong way, I think, but I think they are a little, not siloed, but if we sparse them, if we make them too far apart, then they're just going to do their own work and their own OKRs and not talk to each other enough. I was talking to a company where their people analytics is in enterprise analytics. Their HR consulting is in strategy. their productivity and workforce planning is in like continuous improvement or something like that. And I'm like, that sounds great, but it's not going to drive it. My perspective, you need somebody who doesn't dotted line. You need a strong leader who's going to say, hey, everybody, that is 3 different parts of one idea. And we need to consolidate that and drive towards, we need to have the same goals. Right now, I'm not sure that HR, we're bolting on new things. Are they talking to each other? I don't know yet.
Got it. Well, here's my last big question, if you will, on this topic. And I've been wrestling with it, but I have my own position. But given that you're in role, I'm really curious about not only what it's been like for you, but what the future holds in not only your organization, but in other organizations. It's that what we're talking about when we talk about understanding the thoughts and feelings and skills and ideas of those within the workforce currently, and juxtaposing that against what's happening in talent markets and opportunities with efficiencies with AI and tech, outside the organization as well. That's a big job. That's a lot of information to synthesize, particularly on an ongoing basis. So my question is, do you believe there's a role for third parties to augment the capability and capacity of those in organizations to help elevate the confidence and the resolution of that insight that's being brought to the fore? And again, I'm thinking forward now because I have this, it's just a big job, and I'm just sensing that there's an appetite or an opportunity for expertise to step in and help facilitate the process. So
totally.
Your thoughts?
Yes, I think, like we said, the horse to a zebra thing. A lot of these conversations will have to happen with external vendors and with external experts in terms of I'm here. I don't even know how to get to there. I heard AJ describe dynamic career pathing. I can't even onboard people effectively or in an efficient way or a way I feel comfortable with. So like I'm talking about a very advanced aspiration. You need help. Like anybody would need help with this to do, but it's going to start having that ROI is going to start to be clearer when we start getting we've already proven it at Cleveland Clinic to do this has a great ROI. Here's what I want to point out, because I love the concept and what you're posing, that third parties will need to help with some of the technology, the process, the mindset. But I think there's a missing piece that is still the role of the in-house human resources team and leaders. What you talked about with talent market, with succession planning, all the things that I think struggle because we are going through a deep, deep period of a trust deficit with our workforces. And I don't want to speak to specific industries, specific companies, or anything like that. But is this a time when people have the trust in their employers to say, oh yeah, I'll take a stretch assignment. This talent market says I could take on this extra job for no more money and it will be good for me. How do I feel about that? I think the world being what we've all gone through over the past decade in terms of, events. I think HR's one of their biggest contributions to their organization could be rebuilding the trust within their workforce, such that the new technology, the new systems, the new processes can have the adoption. I mean, lack of technology adoption to me is a trust issue, right? I'll dabble with it. I'll try it out. But if I do it and I get faster, you're going to prove that you don't need me anymore. Something like that, right?
Yep.
I think those two things going in parallel are how we take that next step. Because if you have a glasses half full perspective on it, which I always do, we have the same goal. HR leaders and the workforce has similar aligned goals in that we want the jobs to be enjoyable. We want them to be leveraging the parts of you that you like, your creativity, your compassion, your empathy, all those things, your attention to detail. We want the work to be work that you like, and to be well compensated for it, and to stay here and do well, all those things. If we can get back to that, or get to there, if we weren't there to begin with, that's how the tech is going to get where it needs to be eventually. how do we get the relationship to the point where people will be excited about it?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely love it. And to your point, I read the Edelman Trust Barometer for 2025 and juxtaposed it relative to 2024. And yes, there is elevated concern, unsurprisingly, that automation and tech are going to displace their jobs. So that anxiety, that angst it's been year over year since I've started looking at it in
Sure.
2022. So anyway, yeah, there is an opportunity to engage the workforce in the process. So uh, a lot of work, different mindset to your point.
Easy, right?
Last question, and there's 20 more that are top of mind, but I'm going to pick one. Uh, to the individual now,
Mhm.
if what's your recommendation idea for individuals within workforces to have more confidence and more agency to deal with this uncertain future? What would be your
Yeah.
advice to your kids or young people right now?
That's a really good question. I think when you said my kids, I've actually thought about that recently. Like I have two young daughters, and sort of what if they said, Daddy, what should I do? I think a lot about what are the indispensable skills, indispensable tasks within a community, within a society. I think it's very interesting that during the pandemic, we didn't get worried about white collar jobs. We got worried about firefighters. We got worried about nurses. We got worried about if I call 911, are there cops to show up? Um, how hard it is to find a contractor. Like I think there's some sort of full circle we need to get to where it's like we have been turning away from trades and vocational skills, and now we're realizing those are the people maybe that we should be paying the most. You know what I mean? Like I've come from a family of all federal workers, and so I mean this has been a time for us. But the idea of what skills can't go away without disparaging anyone, I'm not sure that it's marketing, right? Or even what I do, right? It's consulting. Like those things can go away and we will be okay. But I might say to young folks, if I had to do it all over again, I don't know. I might go be an engineer. I might go, my father-in-law's a carpenter. You know what I mean? Like maybe do those things. I wonder if those things are something that as workforce planners, we should be investing in because that is human centric and it's, I don't know. Maybe that's too much of a deep thought of mine, but for a worker who is in the white collar administrative world, I would say assume that every task that you can be automated in your job is automated tomorrow. What are you still good at? What can you still do that a machine could never do or could never do as well? Like get great at that.
Mm.
Get great at that because that's not going away. What's the I call them innately human tasks, right? And it's empathy, it's problem solving, it's critical thinking, right? Those things the tech can't do just yet, and there's so many jobs where we don't want. When I show up to a hotel or a restaurant, I don't want a screen looking at me. You know what I mean? I want a human. So that's what I would say is figure out your unique value proposition that a computer will never replicate in your lifetime.
Yeah. Well, AJ, love your perspectives and ideas. Thank you for being so generous and
Of course.
sharing. And how can our listeners, viewers learn more about you and what you're up to?
Sure. I'm active on LinkedIn, posting. Al and I have done a couple of these. I've done a few other talks about this and our unique perspective at the clinic. What we've been able to do, which is great and has been very effective. And I'd love to engage on LinkedIn. I'll put it in the chat, but feel free to reach out. I think this is a really exciting time. To me, this is the Super Bowl of what we do. So feel free. I'd love to chat.
All right. Well, again, AJ, thank you so much. And you enjoy your holiday next week with your family.
Thank
Well
you so
deserved.
much.
All right. Thank you, my
Thanks.
friend.
Appreciate the time, man.